Sigmund Freud said that religion will exist as long as human beings are afraid of death.
Mm.
Do you think he's on something with that?
Possible. I mean, related to this is the idea of religion as a terror management system. So we are, uniquely cursed as a species that we know we're going to eventually die. And that thought, if we think about it too much, is traumatic. And we need to cope with it somehow. We need to negotiate it somehow. And so much of religion is, coping with the idea of death, thinking about the afterlife and what might come after this earthly life. It's full of stories about people that have cheated death and have survived death. And so much of it are rituals dealing with death, funerary rituals being some of the most conservative rituals out there. Like they look the same century after century after century, burying people in a special place and marking that grave. I mean, it's amazing how funerary rites stay the same over the course of millennia. I don't know too much about this scholarship, but from what I've read, it seems to be empirically proven. So if you show people, so you'll have a control group where you just, show them normal images. And then you have the experiment group where you're showing them like deeply traumatic images, like dead bodies, decomposing bodies, and then measuring people who have strong belief in the afterlife versus people that don't have a strong belief in the afterlife. The people that believe in the afterlife are less distraught by the images.
Yeah, and Andrew, it's so much worse than that. I had a look at terror management theory as a subject, and it is one of the most interesting things that I've ever come across. Terror management theory is this idea that we have a self-preservation instinct within us to stay alive, but we also, as you say, are in a unique position among other animals of knowing about the inevitability of our own death. And this creates a psychological conflict. We want to preserve our lives, but we know that death is inescapably coming our way, and this produces terror, which needs to be managed, hence terror management theory. And so the idea is that people invent ideas to give themselves a sense of immortality, most obviously in religion, which literally promises immortality, but also in things like the creation of the nation or engaging in the arts, creating some magnum opus that will exist long after you die. These are seen by terror management theorists as ways of denying our own death. Ernest Becker's famous book, The Denial of Death, is the origin of this kind of thought. Now, some of the examples that I found are just incredible. The first study, or one of the earlier studies that was conducted, that you'll surely have heard of, was municipal court judges in Tucson, Arizona. Judges, of course, have a very clear set of values as part of their worldview, which is upholding the law. Terror management theory has an idea within it called the mortality salience hypothesis. And this is the idea that if these constructs of religion and community and engaging in arts are a result of the denial of death, then when people are reminded of their deaths, they should momentarily or temporarily have an increased need for affirming these religious ideas, these community spirits, this kind of thing. And so these judges in Arizona, they were given questionnaires. And the questionnaires, they weren't really heavy. They weren't showing them traumatic images. They weren't reminding them of their own death in a significant way. But they just mentioned death on the questionnaire. The control judges, no mention of death. The other judges, when they filled out the questionnaire, they were asked some questions about their own death. Maybe what do you think happens when you die? This kind of thing. And afterwards, they were asked to do something very simple, which is to look at a court case, this one being the solicitation of prostitution, and they were just asked to recommend a bond for the prostitute. The judges who were reminded of their death before being asked recommended an average bond of $455. The control judges recommended an average of $50, which is a huge difference.
Massive,
just based on being reminded of death. Now, it's been shown that you can produce similar results just by flashing the word death on a screen so quick that the person doesn't even register that they've seen it. But by doing so, here are some for you. Christians become more derogatory towards Jews. Jews become more derogatory towards Muslims. Germans, reminded of their death, will sit further away from Turkish people. Americans become more physically aggressive to other Americans with different political views. Americans also become more enthusiastic about preemptive nuclear, chemical, and biological strikes against countries which pose no immediate threat to them. Iranians are more supportive of suicide bombing and more likely to consider becoming suicide bombers themselves after being reminded of death. It can also increase our contempt and disregard for nature. People who are reminded of their death are more likely to deny that humans are animals. They have more negative views towards animals, considering it more appropriate to kill them for reasons other than food and medical research. It also makes people more uncomfortable in natural settings. So there were some Dutch psychologists who showed Dutch people pictures of forests and then pictures of suburban neighborhoods and asked them which they liked the look of better. The control groups liked the look of the forest, they liked the look of the nature, but people who were reminded of their own deaths preferred the suburban neighborhoods. And the mortality salience hypothesis here says that the reason this is happening is because upon being reminded of your death, the need for these death-denying aspects of our community are increased. And so when you look at a forest, which represents the natural world, decay, death, this kind of thing, and you look at a suburban neighborhood, which represents community and the fostering of a sense of immortality and that this community will exist after you, you're more likely to prefer it. And all of this kind of stuff comes about just by being reminded of death, not having some long meditation on what it means to die, but just having it somewhere there in the subconscious. People become more uncomfortable in their own bodies. Sex becomes more aversive to people who are reminded of their own death. People have higher physical aspirations and say that they intend to spend more on clothing and entertainment. They also want more like cars and Rolexes and this kind of things. And I'll give you one more because I found this one really interesting. People who are reminded of their own death, there's a link between this and becoming more materialistic. People were asked to draw pictures of dollars and coins, and the people who were reminded of their own death drew physically larger pictures of dollars and coins. There is just this Niagara of evidence that the mere reminder of death in our minds astronomically increases our need for reminders about community, material goods, religion. You know, there's obviously a strong link. People who have a high death anxiety have been shown to be more religious, and that includes atheists, by the way. Even if you're an atheist, if you're reminded of your own death and you induce death anxiety within an atheist, they might not become religious, but they become more religious than they were before. The problem, of course, is that all of this seems to point to the idea of religion being essentially, as you say, a management of our fear of death, which many people might find quite upsetting and offensive. Because one of the key points of terror management theory is this happens subconsciously. People aren't going... This is what I think people need to understand. When I suggest that religion is an exercise in the denial of death, I'm not saying that people are consciously going, I'm going to die, I'm really terrified, I'm going to invent this story to help myself get out of it. This happens subconsciously. People really do believe that this stuff is actually true and has good philosophical and historical grounding because they have to. Because you couldn't deny death just for the sake of denying death, because you would know that you're deceiving yourself. So of course people are really going to believe that this is a result of genuine philosophical, inquiry. But there's a good deal of evidence here that seems to suggest that at least part of religious belief has a lot to do with just the denial of death. I find that fascinating. Did you enjoy that clip? You must have done at least a little bit because you made it to the end. Well, guess what? There's more. The full conversation that clip that you just watched was taken from is available by clicking the link that just appeared on your screen. Or click just below it to watch more clips from the Within Reason podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel and the Clips channel as well. And if you haven't already, find us on iTunes and Spotify for the audio-only versions. It's far too much information. Most of you have gone already. If you haven't, thanks for sticking with me, and I'll see you in the next one.